what we've seen a lot in the 20th century and then into the 21st is these narratives just not delivering. They don't actually improve people's lives. They don't actually, deliver the utopia that they promise. And so then we see backlashes against that. And in the 20th century, those backlashes came in the form of communism, socialism, to some extent fascism. We had a couple of world wars, and then at the end of the 20th century, Francis Fukuyama comes along and says liberalism won, and that's what we got for forever now. End of history is here, and we're living in the utopia that the liberals have been promising for 200 years. He's kind of calling the bluff on the progress narrative, saying, we got it. This is it. This is heaven. We're all living in heaven now.
Yeah.
But obviously, most people can look around and say that's not the case.
Hello and welcome to Planet Critical, the podcast for a world in crisis. My name is Rachel Donald. I'm a climate corruption journalist and your host. Every week I interview experts who are battling to save our planet. My guests are scientists, politicians, academics, journalists, and activists. They explain the complexities of the energy, economic, political, and cultural crises we face today, revealing what's really going on and what they think needs to be done. These are the stories of the big picture. Go to planetcritical.com to learn more and subscribe. My guest this week is Samuel Miller McDonald. Samuel is a geographer and the author of Progress, A History of Humankind's Worst Idea. And that is exactly what he joins me today to discuss. And I was really astounded by Samuel's research. As he explains on this episode, this myth of progress, that we are constantly moving forward to something better, that development is an inevitable necessity in order to lift people out of their savage origins and into a promised future. I thought that this was all relatively new stuff dating, the past 500 years. But Samuel traces this narrative all the way back to 5,000 years ago, explaining its origins, what it was used for, and how it has evolved through human history into the current iteration that we see today. He explains how it's been both a religious myth and a secular myth, and gives a detailed overview of how Trump is just one of many Republican presidents to fuel the fans of extremist religiosity in order to weaponize this narrative and justify policies. He explains how part of the myth of progress is that the promise is never fulfilled, taking us from the Old Testament through to the AI bubble that we're living through today. We also discuss some of the counter arguments, citing people like Steven Pinker and Hannah Ritchie, who insist that we can measure progress by looking at unbiased data. Samuel dismantles that argument very, very quickly, and then also gives some suggestions as to how we can understand data moving forward, particularly in a world where misinformation and disinformation are near constant companions of discourse. And finally, he explains what progress should be, why it is so vital, and how little time we really have to achieve it. I hope you all enjoy the episode. If you do, please share it far and wide. And if you're loving the show, become a patron on Patreon or support Planet Critical with a paid subscription at planetcritical.com. By signing up, you'll get the Planet Critical newsletter delivered straight to your inbox every week. You'll also have access to the wonderful Planet Critical community, who are full of inspiring thoughts, ideas, critiques, and determination. The links are in the description box below. I'm so grateful to everyone who chooses to support the project. I'm a vehement believer in ad-free and open access content, so Planet Critical wouldn't exist without the direct support of the amazing community. Thank you so much to all of you who keep the project going every week. Samuel, welcome to Planet Critical. It is a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Happy to be here.
I'm really thrilled to have you on because this book that you've written has definitely been, the theme of it has definitely been a topic of conversation, at least in my little bubble of the world, for quite some years. How is it that we have narrativized this myth, essentially, of everything always getting better, despite mountains of evidence that whilst some things are getting better, also our quality of lives and our well-being and our health, all of this is in decline, let alone the ecological collapse that we're witnessing of our home environment, planet Earth. So before we get into it, I mean, how did this come about, you deciding to tackle this myth of progress?
I think the first time I wrote about this was for an article for Current Affairs called Breaking Development. And that article was kind of looking at how the word development gets used to kind of sanitize things that are not environmentally sound or good, and often have negative public health consequences as well. All kind of, just hidden under this very benign, almost technical sounding word. Uh, it gets used globally for, developing countries, developed countries, less developed countries. It has this kind of teleology. It's assumed that every place develops, and that's always good. Um, and looking into the etymology of the word and how it came to kind of over time mean this accumulation of infrastructure or transforming a wildlife habitat into something that's just for human beings. And um, in that process of writing that, the word progress comes up a lot and is sort of almost synonymously tied with the word development. And that then kind of just took me further into, looking at the idea of progress and how it's become a kind of narrative formula. And the more I looked into it, the further back I had to keep kind of researching in time. And really, was able to look at these texts from, the very first kind of recorded texts in the Western canon. And even finding there these kind of, similar narratives of historical development from, moving from these savage dark ages into a civilized golden age. And those narratives being used to do things like, deforest the Levant, for instance, and, spread these kind of market empires through Mesopotamia and then through Southern Europe, North Africa. And finding that narrative just kind of reiterating over and over again through different cultures, through thousands of years. And, to me, that was a project that just needed, the scope of a book.
I didn't realize it went back that far, because I think that certainly within my bubble, um, the myth of progress often gets attached to Western imperialism, and the use of soft power by the United States to continue to colonize and to continue to soak up power and resources and people from the rest of the world, not through overt military threats, although that is rapidly changing, but through the promise of the promised land, the promise of the golden fields, the promise of the best possible life, the promise of living at the apex of progress. And so certainly for me, it was all sort of attached into that, which of course I thought generated, with sort of the colonial outings from Europe and the mass genocides and the pushing of Christianity onto people that were deemed barely human, therefore not capable of having rational thought, etc., etc. But you're saying it goes back even further to justifying deforesting the Levant. What were some of the um, could you perceive a constant reason for justifying or deploying this narrative from the very beginning? Essentially, what I'm asking is, was it always in a bid to centralize resources?
Well, I think so. Yeah. And I mean, I think you're right to have, seen this narrative get used primarily for American exceptionalism and expansionism, because I think that's how it has been most overtly and, potently used in recent history. And what I'm trying to do in the book is connect that phenomenon to this much longer uh, cultural lineage. And I think, I mean, what I'm arguing in the book is that yes, progress narratives have always been used for this kind of growthist, expansionist, political economy. Oftentimes it has been imperial and imperial bureaucracies that's a particular state formation that exists predicated on expansion. But also non-state or non-imperial entities have also, I think, drawn upon, similar kinds of myths. I speak about Norse raiders, for instance. Vikings were these very decentralized raiders. They weren't part of a complex, imperial bureaucracy, but they still had these myths that I'm connecting to these progress narratives because they ultimately end in Valhalla, as long as you follow your war band into battle and expand their territory but I think the first examples I'm drawing from are the Enuma Elish in Mesopotamia and Gilgamesh. And I think the Epic of Gilgamesh is, one interpretation of it is that it's this kind of propaganda for an expansive state. The story is about the hero, essentially taming the god of the forest, a man of the wild, and they work together to kill the god of the forest to take that resource for building a city, and and it talks very explicitly about civilizing, the land and the people, and the Enuma Elish is a similar kind of thing. It's a very different story, but has this similar thing of uh, elevating a particular god, Marduk, who becomes this force for civilization, and he's called the founder of plenteousness, and the bringer of grain and all of this, and I think those stories are very much rooted in this kind of not just establishing agrarian states, but establishing expansive market states around this is early dynastic period, so not quite 5,000 years ago, and so what the book is kind of trying to do is trace that lineage from that initial the very first kind of literary endeavors through Judaism and through the classical Greek thinkers, and to how that classical work was revived by Islamic scholars, and how Islam is also rooted in this kind of Abrahamic progress narrative. Ideas in that in the Islamic Golden Age are then kind of either rediscovered or repurposed in the European Enlightenment, and then through that we get manifest destiny in the U.S. and the kind of that promised land narrative. The book is just going through all of these different episodes, and makes the argument that is the case. That kind of growthist political economy is always tied to that kind of that progress narrative. It's not the only narrative, of course. There are other kinds of political rhetorics and belief systems and social structures that come in to aid that expansionism as well. But this is the one that I'm kind of putting at the center because it's consistent, through all of these cases, and is still very powerful today. And you look at what Trump's different branches of government, they're all doing the same message. They're all going on Twitter and talking about the promised land and the golden age, and putting up the John Gast painting, American Progress, of the blonde angel moving west and pushing the natives out, and they're just reviving all of that and kind of accelerating it. I think every American president has talked about how his administration is the dawn of a new era. Every single inauguration speech is talking about how we've got great progress. We're going to get more progress. But I think this one has really kind of accelerated that, and talking about the manifest destiny in the stars, and creating a whole new branch of the military on that basis.
Well, there's such a religious undertone to the progress narrative, which is why I want to go back again to 5,000 years, because you mentioned Valhalla, the Vikings and Valhalla, and this idea of there being a destiny, a landing place, a place of fulfillment where everything that you want will be delivered to you if you do X, Y, and Z correct in the interim. Obviously, any idea from any Abrahamic religion of heaven, eternity, follows the same formula. What was going on religiously 5,000 years ago? Because I don't know. In the territories where you first came across this narrative in the texts, was there a religious shift happening as well, where these ideas of eternity were coming through, and perhaps a shift away from animism, which I know did dominate a huge chunk of our human history?
Absolutely. Yeah, and the book does start with that kind of look at animism as a organizing force for a lot of probably a vast majority of societies and cultures that have existed, and pinpointing this kind of break with these polytheistic religions that emerge in Mesopotamia. Marduk is the kind of the supreme god. I think the kind of syncretic example of that in the Greco-Roman is the Jupiter and Zeus, and is kind of treated that way as the supreme god is taken on by rulers who claim to be champions of Marduk and kind of justify their position at the top of this hierarchy by being the representatives of the supreme god. And that kind of polytheism, I think, is expansive and is part of the Greek state expansion as well. It's part of the Roman expansionism, of course, the Norse as well. We first start seeing kind of more something closer to monotheism with Zoroastrianism in Persia, and I just have a very short chapter on that, but that I think is kind of the first instance of a eternal heaven idea, and the idea of these two good and evil gods in a kind of battle, and the development of eschatology as this kind of end times battle, and the dividing out of the pure and virtuous and good against the evil and kind of demonic forces of the world. And they have an end times battle that we also see in of course, the Abrahamic faiths, as well as the Nordic polytheism. I think this sort of difference between secular faith in progress and this kind of more religious or mythical faith in progress is a running theme through the book as well. And I think it's a very interesting dynamic. We think of, progress narratives today as being very secular, but I think they are, their origin is coming from these myths and these religious systems.
I just want to get my dates clear. Was Zoroastrian appearing around the same time as this first myth of progress 5,000 years ago? I don't know anything about it. That's why I'm asking.
Zoroastrianism, it kind of has unclear origins, and there's some debate about how much it has been a state religion of Persian states. So I think the period I'm talking about, there's kind of two periods. One is between the first and second millennium BCE, so not 5,000 years ago, quite like 2,000-3,000 years ago, but it becomes a state religion in the I want to say 5th, 6th centuries AD,
Right.
CE.
So from what I can understand, we're not sure exactly of the religious undertones that may or may not have been present 5,000 years ago when you found these first narratives of progress. But certainly, I mean, the religious undertones continue, but they've been framed in a very secular manner in the 21st and the 20th century. When did that happen, and how have we all sort of bought into it?
Well, I think the big break that you see between uh, secularism and religiosity, even outside of progress narratives, is European Enlightenment. So during the kind of the Islamic Golden Age, there's still this strong connection between the religious and the secular. All these scholars who are developing secular ideas around whatever the field is, science, in science or humanities, whatever, they're still connecting that very deeply with the religious texts. During the European Enlightenment, and this happens in just a generation, you see a real kind of schism between secular ideas and religious ideas, and some of these thinkers are very overtly kind of disavowing the religious explanation for phenomena or the religious narratives of progress. So it's not so much about we have to expand the scope of the church or civilize people who don't have Jesus Christ, and becomes more about we have to expand the market, and we have to increase the national revenue and the acreage that's under cultivation or is part of this market. And so the ideas that are developed to do that, to kind of promote that sort of progress narrative, are quite different from converting people to Christianity, say. And so we get thinkers like John Locke, who often called the father of liberalism, who's putting forward these kind of secular value systems to, at first, to justify things like the slave trade, of which he was an investor, the dispossession of Native Americans and their land, and the expansion of the American state westward. But and then he kind of later rolls some of that back a little bit. But we're seeing this all very quickly. So Condorcet is an example of a French thinker who starts his career in the church, trying to become a church official, and just in his career leaves the church, changes his whole kind of philosophy, and goes to work for the French state as this kind of secular bureaucrat, and is also one of these kind of foundational thinkers for what we think of as a modern progress narrative.
I've never thought about this before, but listening to you, I was thinking about how, as you said previously, we are now back in this sort of age of religiosity, particularly with the Trump administration, him claiming that he has essentially been anointed by God in order to do whatever he wants. And the narratives that are coming out of the MAGA camp are heavily indoctrinated in religious justification for violence and greed and impunity. And I hadn't really thought about this before, but obviously over the past few years as well, we've seen this real anti-science kickback, in which people are no longer interested in expert knowledge, no longer interested in expert medical advice, no longer interested in things like vaccinations. And I just hadn't thought so much before about how that is coinciding with this rise of religiosity. What did you find? Like, what do you think has happened essentially for a man like Trump to come in and claim, now I'm not a Christian, but it does seem quite un-Christ-like to me, but claim that he is anointed by God in order to do whatever he wants?
Well, I think Trump is very consistent with this kind of, recent Republican presidents, George W. Bush as well, was tapping into this kind of evangelical power system in the U.S. There's just a whole quite wealthy, large, powerful political constituency that is bound together by this intense religiosity, a kind of like, a zealotry that's, in my opinion, very extremist. And they do engage in extremist violence, bombing abortion clinics, for example, being the most vivid example of that. But they've been a powerful force for all of American history, and it's since Nixon, but I think more potently with Reagan, and since then, Republican presidents tapping into that, using that as a kind of grassroots political force, and using church networks to spread their ideology and their political messages. So Trump's not really an anomaly in that sense. I think what's maybe I don't know, and this is, none of these presidents are display Christian virtue. Obviously,
Yeah.
Trump is a vulgar, sex pest who has no problem being quite open about his deviancy. George W. Bush was a coke-addled fail son who crashed his car while drunk many times, and he had to do a whole kind of like laundering of his image to even run for governor of Texas. And Reagan was the same. He was just a kind of decadent Hollywood elite. So like nothing about these people is Christian or fits with this kind of whatever culture. But I think what's interesting about today is that it's not just the president who's obviously pandering to this insane minority, but Silicon Valley is as well.
Yeah.
The kind of tech whatever culture in the States has always been deeply secular, and you could say that maybe Steve Jobs did some of the like woo-woo new age stuff and was only ate apples for a year or whatever. And so they've always they've been tapped into that kind of California contempt for science and contempt for Western medicine or whatever. But this total turn that they've taken recently toward Peter Thiel talking about the Antichrist and Curtis Yarvin or whatever, and having
the dark enlightenment.
Yeah, exactly, and it is in the sense that it's taking these kind of secular ideas and trying to reinvest them with religious and mythic ideas. And so it is a little bit of a reverse kind of enlightenment happening.
Do you think that, and I know we're totally riffing here, but do you think that might be something to do with the fact that progress has failed in a sense? And so rather than being able to offer the new thing, the next step, a vision for the future, actually we're existing in a world where empire is failing, technical innovation has slowed dramatically. Certainly for the kinds of goods and devices that are available to most people. Silicon Valley hasn't done anything new, really, in 15 years since the smartphone. There's AI, but everybody, well, not everybody, but most of us know that is not obviously what it's promised. And so do you think this might be it? And did you see any evidence of this when you're looking at the history of the progress narrative, that the infusing it in this sort of mythicality, which I'm not sure if that's a word, but sure, mythicality, serves to continue to promote it even when it's not delivering, and especially when it's not delivering?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean the promise, the promise is always either not fulfilled or it's not enough. So the promised land, Canaan, was not enough. And even in the Old Testament, God has to keep promising land. He has to, there has to always be this new kind of thing. And it's never enough. I think what's clever about the more religious progress narratives is that the golden age happens after you die.
Yeah.
So, you can't verify that. But the secular progress narratives are based on this secular faith in living and being alive and having a finite time to be a living organism. And so those have to deliver. They can kind of get away with not delivering on their promises intergenerationally and say, you may not see the fruits of progress, but your grandchildren will. So
Right.
you just have to be a slave so that your grandchildren can be free.
Right.
But I think what we've seen a lot in the 20th century and then into the 21st is these narratives just not delivering. They don't actually improve people's lives. They don't actually, deliver the utopia that they promise. And so then we see backlashes against that. And in the 20th century, those backlashes came in the form of communism, socialism, to some extent, fascism. I think, fascism was a kind of perversion of those backlashes. And we had a couple of world wars. And then at the end of the 20th century, Francis Fukuyama comes along and says liberalism won. And that's what we got for forever now. End of history is here. And we're living in the utopia that the liberals have been promising for 200 years. And I just have a brief little mention in the book that I think that's he's kind of calling the bluff on the progress narrative, saying, we got it. This is it. This is heaven. We're all living in heaven now.
Yeah.
But obviously, most people can look around and say that's not the case. And especially in the 21st century, where all of the stats are getting worse. Everything's, life expectancy getting worse, and poverty getting worse, and then of course the environment, which is the most important thing that there is because everything else comes from it, is rapidly deteriorating. And so I think stuff like AI it's both a kind of Ponzi scheme investment, crime,
Yeah.
but it's also this real panic to scramble for a plausible narrative to keep people on the progress train.
Yeah.
AI, of course, hasn't delivered anything positive or good, and in fact has only stolen water, stolen intellectual property, stolen land, polluted land and air, and polluted, the entire online information system, and is causing cognitive decline and hallucination, psychosis, all of this stuff. And so it's obviously extremely harmful. But if they can attach growth to it, then they can call it progress.
Now, something that you mentioned was life expectancy, quality of life, this kind of thing. The people like Steven Pinker, I think it is. I read an article where he was mentioned. I haven't actually read him. Also Hannah Ritchie of Not the End of the World. These people will sort of look at the data and say, look at the amount of things that are getting better. Child mortality rates are at an all-time low. The amount of people that have access to fresh water, clean water, is at an all-time high. X percentage of populations are being lifted out of poverty in the quote unquote developing world every year. These are all genuine markers of progress, they will argue. And so we must be doing some things right and must not throw the baby out with the bathwater, essentially. How would you respond to such ways of looking at data? I know I think that it's quite context free.
Yeah, for sure. In most cases, they're just lying. It's just, that's what it is. Steven Pinker's big book, Better Angels of Our Nature, inspired a whole literature debunking it. And in many of the cases, some of what he's doing is just kind of, statistical trickery. He's massaging the kind of boundaries of what he's measuring to get a result that he wants. but some of it is also just outright lying. He's just, one example of that was he counted examples of violence done by an indigenous group in, I believe, Uruguay, as an example of violence of prehistoric primitive societies, uh,
Oh,
even
wow.
though the actual violence that was reported was done by colonists against those indigenous
Hmm.
people, but he counted it as the opposite, as violence done by the indigenous people. So, like, there's that kind of just straight up lying that happens with these kinds of people, and uh, they're political pundits. They get paid by people like Bill Gates to present an ideology. They're not legitimate researchers. They're not, earnest, good faith uh, scientists or writers or thinkers. They're political, ideological pundits. And so what they're presenting is just another narrative to try to maintain a status quo political trajectory. Um, and a lot of what I think, Our World in Data does, they do have some legitimate research because that's what think tanks do. They launder illegitimate research with legitimate research. Uh, and their tactic primarily is to uh, set the scope of what they are commenting on or researching, that you know, it puts forward the kind of results that they want, that aligns with their ideology. Um, I think, they all do that. So I would just say it's generally not true. You should, approach those kinds of statistics very skeptically. And, uh, and that's not to say nothing good has ever happened. There certainly have been many examples of good things happening. Developing vaccinations is a good thing. And,
Hmm. Hmm.
public sanitation and public hygiene and medical hygiene, these are great things that have happened as a result of scientific research, and oftentimes against uh, the power structures that exist in a given society. Like getting public sanitation has been a long-term battle against rich people who don't want to fund it, uh, and we only have it now because some people fought and won that battle. But I think it'll be eroded. I think we're not going to have, you know, garbage men to come and pick up waste in 20 years, maybe. I think all of these kind of public good uh, infrastructures that we have came about in this very narrow, special window of time, where you had this kind of incursion of egalitarianism, uh, and a spirit of public mindedness. That's all being eroded, and I think what we're looking to in the future is just this trend of constant eroding of these public goods, and here in the UK, obviously that's the NHS gradually being sold off, dismantled. Um, every industry pretty much has been privatized, from utilities to transportation. Uh, that's the trend. The U.S. is going probably faster. We're starting to see privately owned firefighting, companies. I think privately owned police forces is the next step. So
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
anyway, so those good things that have happened, I don't put them in a framework of progress because they were happening against the momentum of history, and they were happening against these forces of kind of centralization and you know oppression.
That is very, very interesting. I think as well, it's really important to remember that that generosity of spirit, I'll just sort of define it as that, also coincided with an enormous surplus of energy and capital because of the neoliberal economic policies that essentially opened up the vast majority of the world to extraction and exploitation. So a lot of the goodness that was felt in the Western world and experienced in the Western world was thieved, really, really thieved, and left a lot of damage in its wake. So it's one of those situations where once you zoom out and you try to take a holistic picture, they come at a serious cost. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm very grateful to live in a world with vaccinations. It doesn't mean that I agree with the amount of medical testing that was going on and unconsenting individuals, predominantly on the continent of Africa and their children, in order to figure out how to best do that. That was a crime. It was an international crime against humanity. Um, and and that's how it came about, essentially. So I really, when people present sort of data as arguments, it's like you have to learn how to interpret data. I say that as somebody that doesn't pretend to be able to interpret data, but I can interpret narratives and I can see narratives around data. And I think it is an incredibly dangerous narrative to pretend that data doesn't have narratives at all, and that it's unbiased, because it depends what are you measuring for? There's your first bias. What are you trying to find? There it is. And then how are you presenting it to the public? All of that is. I had a big argument with Hannah Ritchie about this on a podcast.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's how you we connected on Twitter. I think was part of that.
Oh yeah, maybe that was maybe that
That
was
was good.
probably
That
one of
was,
my best pieces of work.
I enjoyed it thoroughly. It was very good. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Um, how is it? Just I think I want to keep pushing on this. How is it that people can try to interpret information that they're receiving about the state of the world, given everything we've just discussed, plus all the deliberate disinformation campaigns and the ignorant misinformation campaigns that are concurrent? How can people begin to make sense of what is going on and what to expect in the future?
I think it's very difficult. I mean, it's kind of a, full-time job a little bit
Mm.
to be able to do that and, sift through what's real and what's not real, and especially AI has made that more difficult as well. Um, I think, I mean, the simplest thing I can say is to just approach things skeptically and critically, whatever it might be, even if it feels good, or especially if it feels good. A lot of the information that is put forward by these, the data mongers, I think, is intended to feel good. It's reassuring, and oftentimes when reassuring information has been put out, it's because they want to trap you. They want to control what you think and what you do. And uh, approaching that with skepticism, approaching it critically, I think is the best defense against that. And uh, and then I think balancing that with legitimate research, and you can't verify every piece of information. It's impossible. It would take many lifetimes, to do that. So you also do have to have faith in some uh, individuals, some authorities,
Mhm.
and in some kind of publications. And so balancing that kind of willingness to trust a given authority with that kind of need to be skeptical and critical, I think it's just a skill that I think you just have to practice. And um, even in doing research uh, in a kind of in a university professional context, you still have to do that balance, and you still have to look at another researcher's work and say, well, if it went through peer review, that's a flawed process and it can't guarantee integrity every time, but it's at least a process. And so I'm not going to have to go and replicate that experiment or that research or whatever to determine that I can build upon it or that it has some truth to it. Um, so it's, I think that kind of tension is important for people to sustain, even though it can be difficult and time and energy intensive. I think it's worth it, and I think it's the only thing that you can do to avoid getting duped by all these bad faith,
Mhm.
pundits and commentators and politicians who are just constantly lying now.
Mhm.
That it didn't, the taboo against deception is gone,
Yeah.
and I think discourse is just people just say whatever they want to say.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Also, it helps as well, and it's necessary because there's some good faith myths that abound. I certainly found that when I was writing my book, there's so many things that have become that are part of the discourse of in my little bubble. So many things, quite a few things that when I went and I tried to find an original source, an original citation, it didn't exist. It was something that had been definitely not deliberately made up at some point or another, but just misconstrued at a point and then become fact. So another reason to always try to do your own original research, or as you say, have figures that you trust, because even those who aren't trying to lie sometimes can trip up over the shoelaces of history. Samuel, I've got one more.
Absolutely.
I've got one more question for you
Sure.
before I let you go. Well, two more questions technically. With all the research that you've done, how would you define genuine progress?
Well, the end of the book has a little bit about that. To me, I think one of the most important things that we can hope for is just the opening up of possibility for alternative forms of uh, organization of human life.
Mhm.
And, uh, right now it's not really possible to have a lot of diversity in culture, in different forms of political and social organization, thanks to this kind of global network of, empires and markets and so forth. And um, I think the dissolution of that structure, I think, can bring about a kind of opening up of possibilities for alternatives. And I try not to say in the book too much about what those alternatives should be, because I think we're entering this kind of unknowable epoch. Uh, and the challenges that are before us are things that we can't really anticipate or can't necessarily produce systems now that will be adequate to those problems in the future. But I think just the kind of opening up of possibility is very important, and something that is possible. It is a viable future to look forward to. Um, Ultimately, I think all this comes down to just we have a limited planet and limited resources and energy, and we have to do self-imposed uh, limits on expansion of the human world and the economy. And whether that's possible or not, I don't want to comment on, but it's the only progress is the ability to do that equitably, quickly, and fairly. I think is the only thing that could constitute an improvement in life and human life and non-human life.
Thank you, Samuel. My final question for you is, who would you like to platform?
I would like to see more from Yorgos Kallis, who is a great degrowth scholar. He was my DPhil examiner and a very nice, good guy, and I think he has great things to say about this. That very topic of putting limits on the kind of expansion of the economy.
Great. Thank you so much, Samuel. This is so interesting.
Thanks very much, Rachel. I enjoyed it.
If you want to learn more, I've put links to everything in the description box below. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you're new here and share the episode if you enjoyed it. To support the show, subscribe at planetcritical.com, where you can read the weekly newsletter. You can also become a Planet Critical patron. All links are in the description box below. As always, my deepest thanks to that community. Planet Critical wouldn't exist without your support. Thank you everyone for listening and for coming on this journey together.